Welcome viewers. Today we're going to explore some fascinating recent scientific research on the colonization and settlement of New Zealand. This is an area that has seen some exciting new developments in archaeology, genetics, and historical analysis over the past few years. We'll be taking a journey through time, from the arrival of the first Polynesian settlers to the waves of European colonization centuries later. New Zealand, or Aotearoa as it's known in the Māori language, has a unique and complex history of human migration and settlement. As an isolated island nation, its story provides an intriguing case study in how new lands are discovered, settled, and transformed by human activity. The research we'll discuss today sheds new light on questions like: when did the first people arrive in New Zealand? How did they get there? What impact did they have on the land and ecosystems? How did later waves of European settlement change New Zealand's society and environment? These are questions that fascinate historians, archaeologists, and many other researchers. And they have relevance far beyond New Zealand itself. By studying this specific case, we can learn broader lessons about human migration, cultural encounters, colonialism, and humanity's impact on new environments. So while we focus on New Zealand today, keep in mind how these findings might apply to other contexts as well. For both professionals and enthusiasts interested in history, archaeology, or Pacific cultures, keeping up with the latest research in this area is incredibly valuable. Our understanding is constantly evolving as new evidence comes to light and researchers apply innovative methods and technologies. Following these developments gives us an ever clearer and more nuanced picture of the past. In today's video, we'll cover several major themes. The initial Polynesian discovery and settlement of New Zealand. The development of Maori culture and society. Early European exploration and contact. Large-scale European colonization in the 19th century. The cultural and environmental impacts of settlement. For each of these topics, we'll discuss what recent research has revealed about the timing, methods, and consequences of human arrival and settlement. We'll look at how new archaeological finds, improved dating techniques, genetic studies, and creative historical analyses are transforming our understanding of New Zealand's past. My goal is to present these scientific findings in an accessible way, highlighting the key points and their significance. Whether you're a student, a history buff, or just curious to learn more about New Zealand, I hope you'll come away with new insights into this fascinating story of discovery and settlement. As we go through the research, we'll see how our picture of the past is being refined and sometimes dramatically revised. We'll encounter some surprises, settlements that happened earlier or later than previously thought, migrations that were larger or faster than expected, and impacts on the land that were more rapid and extensive than imagined. We'll also see how different lines of evidence, archaeological remains, ancient DNA, climate records, oral histories, and more, can be woven together to create a richer, more complete understanding of the past. It's a great example of how multidisciplinary research leads to new breakthroughs. So get ready for a journey through time as we explore humanity's discovery and settlement of New Zealand. We'll be covering over 700 years of history, from the first Polynesian arrivals to the establishment of British colonial rule. It's a story of exploration, adaptation, conflict, and transformation that continues to shape New Zealand today. Let's dive in and see what the latest scientific research tells us about this remarkable chapter in human history. Part 1. Polynesian discovery and settlement. We begin our journey with one of the greatest feats of maritime exploration in human history, the Polynesian discovery and settlement of New Zealand. This is a story that has captured imaginations for generations, but only in recent years have we started to pin down the details of when, how, and by whom New Zealand was first settled. Let's set the stage. Around 3,000 years ago, a wave of human migration began spreading east across the Pacific Ocean. These voyagers, ancestors of today's Polynesian peoples, used sophisticated ocean-going canoes and remarkable navigational skills to discover and settle island after island. By about 1,000 years ago, they had reached the far corners of the Polynesian Triangle, Hawaii to the north, Easter Island to the east, and New Zealand to the southwest. New Zealand was among the very last substantial landmasses on Earth to be settled by humans. Its discovery represented the culmination of thousands of years of Polynesian voyaging and exploration. But when exactly did this momentous event occur? This has been a subject of intense debate and research. For many years, it was thought that New Zealand was settled as early as 800 AD or even earlier. However, recent research has dramatically revised this timeline. Through improved radiocarbon dating methods and careful re-examination of archaeological evidence, we now have a much clearer picture of when humans first arrived. The current scientific consensus places initial Polynesian settlement of New Zealand in the late 13th or early 14th century AD, so around 1250 to 1300. This is based on several lines of evidence. First, there are no definitively human-associated artifacts or remains in New Zealand that reliably date to before about 1280 AD. The earliest archaeological sites cluster tightly in the period from 1300 to 1350 AD. This includes sites with classic East Polynesian artifacts as well as remains of hunted animals like moa. Second, analysis of environmental changes indicates a sudden and dramatic shift starting around 1280 AD. This includes evidence of forest clearance, increased erosion and sedimentation in lakes and wetlands, and a spike in charcoal from human-set fires. The timing and rapidity of these changes aligns perfectly with human arrival. Third, genetic studies of Pacific rat bones found in New Zealand provide additional support for this timeframe. These rats were transported by Polynesian settlers, likely as a food source. The most reliable dated rat bones are no older than the late 13th century. So we can now say with confidence that humans first set foot in New Zealand sometime between about 1250 and 1300 AD. This represents a dramatic shortening of New Zealand's human prehistory compared to earlier theories. But it aligns well with evidence from other parts of East Polynesia, which were also settled around this time. What's particularly striking is how quickly Polynesian settlers spread across New Zealand after initial landfall. Within a century, archaeological evidence shows human presence throughout the country, from the far north of the North Island to the southern reaches of the South Island. This rapid dispersal is a testament to the maritime skills and adaptability of these pioneering settlers. But how many people were involved in this initial settlement? While precise numbers are impossible to determine, recent research suggests the founding population may have been larger than previously thought. Genetic studies of modern Maori populations indicate a founding group of perhaps 100 to 200 women, implying a total initial population of several hundred. This actually aligns well with Maori oral traditions, which speak of multiple founding canoes arriving from the ancestral homeland of Hawaii. While the details of these traditions vary, they consistently describe an organized migration involving multiple vessels and several hundred people. The picture that emerges is not of accidental castaways or a tiny group of survivors, but of an intentional voyage of discovery and settlement. The settlers brought with them a range of crops, animals, and technologies adapted for colonizing new lands. This allowed them to rapidly establish themselves and thrive in their new environment. Speaking of that environment, what was New Zealand like when humans first arrived? Recent paleo-environmental research has given us a clearer picture. New Zealand in the 13th century was largely forested, with diverse plant and animal life, including now extinct megafauna like the giant moa birds. The climate was relatively stable and slightly cooler than today. This pristine landscape would be dramatically transformed by human arrival. Studies of lake sediments, pollen records, and animal remains reveal rapid and extensive changes to New Zealand's ecosystems in the decades and centuries following settlement. Forests were cleared, first by burning and later for agriculture. Many species of birds and other animals were hunted to extinction, most famously the various moa species. The speed and scale of these changes have been surprising to researchers. It appears that within just 100 years of human arrival, moa and other large bird species were extinct or nearly so across much of New Zealand. Forest clearance and transformation of the landscape continued over subsequent centuries. This rapid transformation speaks to both the vulnerability of New Zealand's isolated ecosystems and the transformative impact of human settlers with their new technologies, animals, and plants. It's a vivid example of how humans can dramatically reshape environments, especially when encountering pristine landscapes. To sum up this section, the latest research places Polynesian settlement of New Zealand around 1250 to 1300 AD, followed by rapid dispersal across the country. This was likely an organized migration involving hundreds of settlers, who quickly established themselves and began transforming the landscape. These findings remind us of the remarkable maritime achievements of Polynesian peoples and the profound impact humans can have when entering new environments. Part 2. Development of Maori culture and society. Now that we've covered the initial settlement, let's look at how Polynesian settlers adapted to their new home and developed the distinct culture we now know as Maori. This is a story of remarkable adaptability, as people accustomed to life on small tropical islands adjusted to a much larger, temperate landmass with unfamiliar plants and animals. Recent archaeological and anthropological research has given us a much clearer picture of how Maori society evolved in the centuries following initial settlement. One key insight is that this was a period of rapid cultural change and innovation. The earliest sites in New Zealand show clear continuity with East Polynesian material culture. We see familiar adze forms, fishing gear, and ornaments that have clear parallels elsewhere in Polynesia. But within a few generations, distinctively Maori forms begin to emerge. This includes new types of stone tools, innovative wooden carvings, and unique forms of personal adornment like hei tiki pendants. This cultural evolution reflects the need to adapt to new resources and environmental conditions. For example, the abundance of high-quality stone in New Zealand led to a flourishing stone tool industry, with forms not seen elsewhere in Polynesia. The Great Forests provided new opportunities for wood carving and architecture, and the colder climate required new forms of clothing and shelter. One of the most significant adaptations was in food production and procurement. The tropical crops brought by settlers, like taro and sweet potato, could only be grown in the warmer northern parts of New Zealand. In cooler regions, greater reliance on hunting, fishing, and gathering was necessary. This led to the development of new technologies and practices, like specialized bird snaring techniques and intensive shellfish harvesting. Archaeological evidence shows a shift in settlement patterns over time. The earliest sites tend to be coastal, focused on exploiting marine resources and the now extinct moa. But as these resources were depleted, there was a move towards more permanent inland settlements and greater reliance on cultivated crops where possible. This period also saw the development of a distinctive Maori social and political organization. The basic unit was the hapu, or sub-tribe, usually comprising several hundred related individuals. Multiple hapu would form an iwi, or tribe. This social structure was intimately tied to the land, with each group having defined territories and resources. One of the most visible manifestations of this social organization was the development of fortified settlements typically built on hilltops or ridges. Began to appear in the archaeological record around 1500 AD and became increasingly common over subsequent centuries. Their construction represents a significant investment of labor and resources, suggesting increasing competition for territory and resources as population grew. Speaking of population, how many people were living in New Zealand on the eve of European contact? This has been a subject of much research and debate. Early estimates varied widely, but recent studies using a combination of archaeological data, environmental carrying capacity models, and comparisons with other Polynesian societies have converged on a figure of around 100,000 to 120,000 people by the late 18th century. This represents impressive population growth over about 500 years, starting from just a few hundred initial settlers. It's a testament to the success of Maori in adapting to and exploiting their new environment. But it also likely contributed to increasing social complexity and competition for resources. Another area of recent research focus has been on long-distance voyaging and trade. While New Zealand was more isolated than many Polynesian islands, it was not completely cut off. There's archaeological evidence of sporadic contact with other parts of Polynesia, particularly Norfolk Island and the Kermadec Islands. This includes distinctive stone tools and ornaments that were traded over long distances. There's also intriguing evidence of at least one voyage from New Zealand to South America and back. Genetic studies have found that sweet potatoes in Polynesia, including New Zealand, originated in South America. The timing suggests they were brought back by Polynesian voyagers sometime after initial settlement of New Zealand but before European contact. This hints at the remarkable scope and ability of Polynesian navigation, even in the furthest reaches of their domain. By the time of first European contact in the late 18th century, Maori had developed a rich and complex culture uniquely adapted to New Zealand. They had transformed much of the landscape, developed sophisticated agriculture and resource management practices, and created distinctive art forms and social structures. This set the stage for the dramatic changes that would come with European arrival. Part 3. Early European Exploration and Contact. The next chapter in New Zealand's settlement history begins with European exploration in the 17th and 18th centuries. This initiated a period of increasing contact and exchange between two very different cultures, ultimately laying the groundwork for large-scale colonization. The first documented European discovery of New Zealand was by Dutch explorer Abel Tasman in 1642. Tasman's brief encounter with Maori in Golden Bay ended in violence, and he left without setting foot on shore. It would be another 127 years before the next recorded European visit. That next contact came with British explorer James Cook's first voyage to New Zealand in 1769. Cook spent 6 months charting the coastline and making detailed observations of Maori life and culture. His accounts, along with those of naturalists like Joseph Banks, provided Europe with its first substantial knowledge of New Zealand and its people. Recent historical research has given us a more nuanced understanding of these early encounters. We now recognize that both Maori and Europeans were active participants, each trying to understand and engage with the other through the lens of their own cultural frameworks. These meetings were characterized by a mix of curiosity, caution, trade, and occasional violence. One interesting area of study has been the exchange of goods and technologies during this period. Europeans brought metal tools, cloth, and other manufactured items that were eagerly sought by Maori. In return, Europeans obtained fresh food, water, timber, and flax. This trade had significant impacts on both societies. For Maori, access to metal tools in particular led to rapid changes in material culture and technology. Archaeological evidence shows a shift away from traditional stone tools towards metal implements in many areas. This had knock-on effects on activities like wood carving and canoe building. The introduction of new crops like potatoes also had far-reaching effects. Potatoes were well suited to New Zealand's climate and could be grown more widely than traditional Polynesian crops. Their adoption led to changes in agriculture, settlement patterns, and even warfare, as they provided a more reliable food source for military campaigns. For Europeans, New Zealand offered new resources like timber for ship repairs and flax for rope making. These would become important factors in the economic calculus that eventually led to colonization. The reports brought back by explorers and traders also sparked European interest in the potential for whaling, sealing, and eventual settlement. An often overlooked aspect of this period is the role of Maori travelers. Research has shown that significant numbers of Maori visited Australia, Europe, and even North America in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. These travelers brought back new knowledge, technologies, and ideas that influenced Maori society. Some played important roles as cultural mediators in subsequent European-Maori interactions. The introduction of new diseases during this contact period had devastating consequences for Maori populations. While precise numbers are hard to determine, studies suggest that introduced diseases like influenza, measles, and tuberculosis may have reduced the Maori population by 10 to 20% or more by the 1830s. This demographic decline would have significant implications for later colonial interactions. Another major impact of early European contact was the introduction of muskets. The so-called musket wars of the 1810s to 1830s saw unprecedented levels of inter-tribal warfare as some Iwi gained access to firearms before others. This period of conflict led to significant population movements and reconfigurations of tribal territories. By the 1830s, European presence in New Zealand was increasing rapidly. Traders, missionaries, and settlers were establishing more permanent footholds, particularly in the north of the North Island. This growing presence, along with concerns about French colonial ambitions, ultimately led Britain to consider formal colonization. This early contact period, from first European arrival to the eve of formal colonization, was thus a time of dramatic change for both Maori and European societies. It set the stage for the even more profound transformations that would come with large-scale European settlement in the 19th century. Part 4. Large-scale European colonization. The next major phase in New Zealand's settlement history began with the formal establishment of British sovereignty and organized European colonization in 1840. This ushered in a period of rapid demographic, economic, and cultural change that would fundamentally reshape New Zealand society. The key event marking the start of this era was the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840. This agreement between the British Crown and many Maori chiefs established British sovereignty over New Zealand while purporting to protect Maori rights and property. The interpretation and implementation of this treaty would become a central issue in New Zealand's colonial and post-colonial history. Recent historical research has given us a more complex understanding of the motivations and expectations of both Maori and British signatories to the treaty. It's clear that there were significant differences in understanding and expectation between the Maori and British signatories. Many Maori saw the treaty as a partnership agreement that would protect their autonomy, while the British viewed it as a transfer of sovereignty. These differing interpretations would lead to conflicts in the decades to come. Following the treaty, European settlement increased dramatically. The New Zealand Company, a private colonization venture, began organizing large-scale immigration from Britain. Other settlers came from Australia and elsewhere. The European population grew from just a few thousand in 1840 to over 250,000 by 1870. This rapid influx of settlers had profound impacts on New Zealand's demography, economy, and environment. Recent research has shed new light on the patterns and consequences of this settlement. Demographically, the European population quickly outnumbered Maori. By 1858, Europeans made up more than 50% of the total population, a remarkably rapid transition. This shift in population balance had major implications for power dynamics and resource control. Economically, the colonists brought new technologies, crops, and animals that transformed the landscape. Sheep farming became particularly important, with the number of sheep growing from just a few thousand in 1840 to over 13 million by 1871. This pastoral economy became the backbone of New Zealand's exports. Environmentally, European settlement led to widespread deforestation as land was cleared for farming and timber export. Studies of pollen records and sediment cores show a dramatic acceleration of forest clearance from the 1840s onward. By 1900, nearly two-thirds of New Zealand's forest cover had been lost. The pattern of settlement was not uniform across the country. The South Island, with its vast plains suitable for sheep farming, saw particularly rapid European colonization. In contrast, parts of the North Island, especially in the central and eastern regions, remained predominantly Maori for longer. One of the most significant aspects of this period was the large-scale transfer of land from Maori to European ownership. This occurred through a variety of means, some negotiated sales, some confiscations following the New Zealand Wars of the 1860s, and some through legal mechanisms that disadvantaged Maori owners. Recent historical analyses have highlighted the complexity of this process. While some land transfers were relatively fair transactions, many were characterized by misunderstanding, pressure, or outright fraud. The Native Land Court, established in 1865, played a key role in this process by converting communal Maori land ownership into individual titles that could more easily be sold. By 1900, Maori had lost possession of most of their land. This land loss had profound economic, social, and cultural impacts that continue to resonate today. It's been a major focus of treaty settlement processes in recent decades. The establishment of colonial governance structures was another key feature of this period. New Zealand initially operated as a dependent colony of New South Wales, but became a separate British colony in 1841. A system of provincial governments was established in the 1850s, followed by the granting of responsible self-government in 1856. Recent research has explored how these new governance structures interacted with existing Maori political systems. In some areas, particularly in the early years of colonization, there were attempts at power sharing or co-governance. However, as European numbers and influence grew, these arrangements generally gave way to more centralized, European-style governance. The New Zealand Wars of the 1860s and 1870s were a pivotal event in this period. These conflicts, primarily fought over land and sovereignty issues, had far-reaching consequences. Recent scholarship has emphasized the complexity of these wars, moving beyond simple British versus Maori narratives to explore the various alliances and motivations involved. The wars resulted in significant loss of life, particularly among Maori. They also led to large-scale land confiscations, especially in the Waikato and Taranaki regions. These confiscations would become a major source of grievance and the subject of later treaty settlements. An often overlooked aspect of colonization was its impact on Maori health. The introduction of new diseases, combined with land loss, economic disruption, and warfare, led to a sharp decline in the Maori population. Some estimates suggest the Maori population fell by nearly half between 1840 and 1900. Recent research has also highlighted the diversity of the colonial experience. While much focus has been on British settlers, there were also significant numbers of settlers from other parts of Europe, as well as from China following the Otago gold rush of the 1860s. Each of these groups brought their own cultural practices and had unique interactions with both Maori and other settler communities. The latter part of the 19th century saw the emergence of a distinct New Zealand identity among the settler population. This was influenced by the unique environment, interactions with Maori culture, and the practical challenges of life in a new land. Studies of literature, art, and material culture from this period reveal the gradual formation of a new cultural identity that was neither fully British nor Maori. By the turn of the 20th century, New Zealand had been thoroughly transformed. It had gone from an exclusively Maori land to a primarily European settler society in just 60 years. The speed and scale of this transformation were remarkable, even by the standards of other settler colonies. This period of large-scale colonization set the stage for the social, economic, and political developments of the 20th century. Many of the issues it generated, particularly around land ownership, cultural identity, and the place of Maori in New Zealand society, continue to be central to New Zealand's national conversation today. Part 5. Cultural and environmental impacts of settlement. To conclude our exploration of New Zealand's settlement history, let's examine some of the broader cultural and environmental impacts of both Polynesian and European colonization. Recent research has provided new insights into these long-term consequences, some of which continue to shape New Zealand today. First, let's consider the environmental impacts. The story of human settlement in New Zealand is, in many ways, a story of environmental transformation. When the first Polynesian settlers arrived, they encountered a land that had been isolated for millions of years, with unique flora and fauna that had evolved in the absence of mammals, apart from bats. The impact of Polynesian settlement was rapid and profound. Recent studies using a combination of archaeological evidence, pollen analysis, and animal remains have painted a clearer picture of these changes. Forest clearance. Large areas of forest were cleared, primarily through burning. This was done to create space for settlements and gardens, and to make hunting easier. Pollen records show a sharp decline in forest species and an increase in bracken fern, a colonizer of disturbed areas, coinciding with human arrival. Animal extinctions. Perhaps the most dramatic impact was on New Zealand's unique bird life. Within a few centuries of human arrival, several species of moa were hunted to extinction, along with other large birds like Haast's eagle. Recent research suggests this happened even more quickly than previously thought, possibly within 100 years of initial settlement. Marine resource depletion. Studies of midden contents showed changes in the size and species of shellfish and fish over time, indicating localized depletion of these resources. The arrival of Europeans brought a second wave of even more extensive environmental changes. Widespread deforestation. The rate of forest clearance accelerated dramatically. By 1900, an estimated 63% of New Zealand's original forest cover had been lost. This had significant impacts on soil erosion, water quality, and biodiversity. Introduction of new species. Europeans introduced a wide range of plants and animals, both intentionally and accidentally. This led to significant changes in ecosystems. For example, introduced predators like rats, stoats, and cats have had devastating effects on native bird populations. Agricultural transformation. Large areas were converted to pasture for sheep and cattle farming. This dramatically altered landscapes, particularly in the eastern parts of both main islands. Recent research has also focused on the long-term consequences of these changes. For example, studies have shown how deforestation has contributed to increased sedimentation in coastal areas, affecting marine ecosystems. There's also growing understanding of the cascading effects of species loss on ecosystem function. Turning to cultural impacts, the settlement history of New Zealand has led to a unique cultural landscape. Maori cultural adaptation. The centuries between Polynesian settlement and European contact saw the development of a distinctive Maori culture adapted to New Zealand conditions. Recent archaeological and anthropological research has highlighted the innovations in areas like agriculture, fishing techniques, and social organization that emerged during this period. Cultural exchange and hybridization. The period of early European contact and settlement was characterized by significant cultural exchange. Maori rapidly adopted many European technologies and practices, while European settlers were also influenced by Maori culture. This led to the emergence of hybrid cultural forms, particularly in areas like agriculture and maritime technology. Language change. The arrival of English had a profound impact on Te Reo Maori, the Maori language. By the mid-20th century, the language was in danger of extinction. However, recent decades have seen significant revitalization efforts. New national identity. The interaction of Maori and European cultures, along with later immigrant groups, has led to the emergence of a distinct New Zealand national identity. Recent sociological research has explored how this identity continues to evolve, particularly in response to increasing cultural diversity from new waves of immigration. One area of recent focus has been on the long-term socio-economic impacts of colonization on Maori communities. Studies have shown persistent disparities in areas like health, education, and economic outcomes, many of which can be traced back to land loss and cultural disruption during the colonial period. Another important area of research has been on the ongoing process of addressing historical injustices through the Treaty of Waitangi settlement process. This has involved both historical research to establish the facts of past events, and policy research on effective ways to provide redress and promote reconciliation. In conclusion, the settlement history of New Zealand, from initial Polynesian arrival through European colonization, has had profound and lasting impacts on both the natural environment and cultural landscape of the country. Understanding these impacts, their origins, and their ongoing consequences remains a vital area of research across multiple disciplines. This history continues to shape contemporary New Zealand in numerous ways, from its unique biodiversity challenges to its bicultural national identity and ongoing efforts at cultural revitalization and reconciliation. As research methods continue to advance, we can expect our understanding of this complex history to become even richer and more nuanced in the years to come. As we wrap up our exploration of the latest research on New Zealand's settlement history, let's recap some key points and consider their broader implications. First, we've seen how new scientific techniques have dramatically revised our understanding of when and how New Zealand was settled. The short chronology, placing initial Polynesian arrival around 1250 to 1300 AD, has major implications for how we view the speed of cultural adaptation and environmental change. It shows how quickly humans can transform new landscapes and develop distinctive cultures. This rapid transformation is a recurring theme throughout New Zealand's settlement history. Both the initial Polynesian settlers and later European colonists brought about sweeping changes to the environment and existing social structures in a remarkably short time. This serves as a vivid example of the profound impact human societies can have when entering new ecosystems. The research we've discussed also highlights the importance of interdisciplinary approaches in understanding complex historical processes. Advances in fields like archaeology, genetics, paleoecology, and historical analysis have all contributed to a more comprehensive picture of New Zealand's past. This underscores the value of collaborative, multifaceted research in tackling big historical questions. Another key theme that emerges is the ongoing impact of historical events on contemporary society. The consequences of colonization, in terms of land ownership, cultural practices, and socioeconomic outcomes, continue to shape New Zealand today. This illustrates how understanding history is crucial for addressing current social and political issues. The story of New Zealand's settlement also provides insights into broader patterns of human migration and cultural contact. It shows both the remarkable capabilities of humans to adapt to new environments and the potential for conflict and disruption when different cultures come into contact. These lessons have relevance far beyond New Zealand, offering perspectives on issues of migration, cultural exchange, and environmental impact that are globally significant. Furthermore, the research we've discussed demonstrates the value of combining scientific evidence with indigenous knowledge and oral traditions. The increasing recognition of Maori perspectives in understanding New Zealand's past enriches our historical understanding and provides a model for how indigenous histories can be incorporated into academic research. Looking forward, this research opens up new questions and avenues for future study. How can we better understand the long-term ecological consequences of human arrival in pristine environments? How do societies balance cultural preservation with adaptation to new circumstances? How can historical injustices be addressed in ways that promote reconciliation and social cohesion? These are questions that extend far beyond New Zealand and touch on fundamental issues of human society and our relationship with the environment. For viewers interested in learning more, there are many ways to delve deeper into this fascinating history. Consider exploring books on New Zealand history, visiting museums with exhibits on Maori culture and colonial history, or even planning a trip to see some of the archaeological sites we've discussed. I encourage you to share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. What aspects of New Zealand's settlement history do you find most interesting or surprising? Are there parallels you see with the history of other regions or countries? If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content on historical and archaeological research, please like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to bring you in-depth explorations of fascinating scientific topics. Remember, our understanding of the past is constantly evolving as new evidence comes to light and new research methods are developed. Staying curious and open to new information is key to deepening our understanding of history and its relevance to the present. Thank you for joining me on this journey through New Zealand's settlement history. By exploring how humans have shaped this unique land over the centuries, we gain valuable insights into our collective past and the ongoing story of human interaction with the natural world. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.